What time is it?
Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.
Starting things off, man, what did you think of Billboard's and Vibe's recent lists of their top 50 rappers of all time? What was your greatest rappers of all time? What was your initial impression?
Well, admittedly, I didn't study it that closely. I saw Jay-Z was at the top. I saw some MCs that I thought were really crucial and important way down, and I saw some people missing. I think it's a subjective, it's an opinion. I think Billboard, a bit of a digression, I've written quite a bit for Billboard.
Oh,
and I remember
let me turn this. That's dope. I used to write for Billboard too.
Well, I'll tell you, so I went down to do this thing about 2014. I went to do a profile of Scott Storch before he kind of made a comeback. And Storch was like, he was real cool because, like, man, I really like Billboard, because Billboard's thing was he had fallen off, but in 1 year, maybe it's 2008, he had like charted with, Lean Back and Chris Brown. Yeah, like he set a kind of record for a producer in 1 calendar year, and then he blew it all on cocaine and his lifestyle. But he was like, I really respect Billboard because it's just scientific. It's just the charts. Yeah. Whereas the Grammys is political. So, I mean, I think that the Billboard list factored in some aspects of one's career. Certainly with Jay-Z, you said.
And if I'm not mistaken, it is also something they did in conjunction with Vibe.
Okay. I mean, I disagreed with a lot of it. I'm going to be honest with you. I really just, if anybody asks me my greatest MC of all time, I generally say Rakim, because of his game-changing effect, his absolute skill. Did he change the culture the way Jay-Z did? No, or 50 Cent. So the three most influential MCs, if you want to call it, probably right now would be Jay-Z, 50 Cent, and Dre, in terms of like their impact, and they're billionaires, and but I assume these things are based on skill, like I would rank it on skill. And I can't put anybody above Rakim.
Yeah.
And I think you and I, valid. And we both talked about like storytelling, was Slick Rick on the list? I don't think so.
No, he was not.
And Cool G Rap.
We had talked about off camera when we first came up with the idea to discuss it. And this is kind of the route I took, but it can open a lot of doors, or, artists that were not on the list that we thought should be, so I just off the top of my head just wrote a list of rappers who I noticed were absent. And again, some of them, and again, it's a conversation piece, in terms of should they or should they not be on the list. I think for most of these artists, you could do that even for the ones that are included on the list too, for some of them. But some of the names I came up with, and one of them was Slick Rick. I'll just name them. I said Will Smith, Too Short, Cool G Rap, Jeezy, Royce the 5'9", Ja Rule, Nelly, Tretch, Slick Rick, The Game, Exhibit, Yellow Wolf, Beanie Siegel, Proof, Prodigy, and Mace.
I wouldn't put all of those guys on the list, but Tretch changed the game. Look, I'm old enough. See, a lot of these people making these lists, I think, are going back and listening to the catalog, and they weren't alive. I remember
think younger people are making it too, which they're entitled to their opinion, but they don't have the benefit of perspective that older music fans have.
So I'm there in New York. So I'm living it, right? And 88, 89, 90, Public Enemy comes out with, Fight the Power and that kind of stuff. But I remember this moment where Foo Schnickens, Das FX, and Tretch, where they just, and Ice-T has said this to me working on this book, books. He said, when I heard those guys, I was like, man, that's why one of the reasons he moved into his rock band is like, you cannot technically compete with that, speed. Busta Rhymes as well, but Tretch, Ghetto Bastard, they're very, very influential MC.
Ghetto Bastard, wickedest man alive. It's crazy.
So a lot of that stuff is, and I think you and I may have talked about this earlier, but like when you make these lists, You know, I would break it down into cadence and flow, but then there's storytelling. So just getting back to Slick Rick, if I three best storytellers off the top of my head, Slick Rick, Ice-T is a great storyteller, and Cool G Rap. Like
Yeah.
in terms of telling a story that's almost like a mini movie. You know, you cannot beat, you know, a children's story by Slick Rick. And I mean,
I put
some of Cool
Biggie
G.
in that list too, as far as
Oh
story.
yeah. Warning, a lot of the stuff. But you and I discussed this. Can Biggie be the greatest of all time when he really had one album during his lifetime? The second was one he did, but it was posthumous. But a lot of what we know are remixes, and we don't know how he would have aged into his 30s. Give Jay-Z props for making the top of that list, and I think you're the one that pointed out to me. What did they end the Super Bowl with? The DJ Khaled song, God.
God did, yeah.
Yeah, God did. And I said to my daughter, I was like, just listen to what Jay-Z's doing. Because a lot of people were talking about being one of the greatest, you know, sets of bars or verses for a man of his age. It was a mature rap, you know. So he's altered his style, which not everybody can do. But I mean, I think he was deeply influenced by Biggie and, you know, guys before him. So, you know, I look at, and I'm going to make some analogies to sports a bit later, but I think, how much did you change everybody that came after you? And there's a really good DJ Vlad interview with, I think I've mentioned this before, with Melly Mel. And Melly Mel said, you know, for me to be the greatest of all time, you had to be able to do it back in our era and in the present era. And in their era, meaning Disco Fever and Harlem World, these clubs, the T Connection, you couldn't be rapping about guns and drugs because there were actual gangster killers in the crowd. And so they had to rap, you know, people laugh about the old school rap being like party music. They didn't really have the option. Now, I'm going to blow your mind with something. Thought about this when I was in the shower. Russell Simmons, I was working on something and it didn't really happen as a film thing, but I remember talking to Russell, and Russell Simmons, who you think would be an authority on this stuff. He said, by far, the greatest rapper in terms of rocking a crowd was DJ Hollywood. Now, people don't even reference him anymore, but Hollywood, he said nobody, and he was there in the formative years when hip hop came from the parks into the nightclubs, and this is including Melly Mel. DJ Hollywood, he was more of a party rapper, he was slick, but so Russell, you know, probably he was all enjoying his life with models and cocaine back then. His point of view was, who could read the crowd and just make up rhymes on the spot that blew people's minds and entertained everybody. He said there was no entertaining rapper like DJ Hollywood, and nobody talks about him anymore. It's kind of a lost, like if I mention some old boxers from the 1930s, you'll be like, okay, but where do they rank next to Floyd Mayweather? People only know what's in front of them right now. But the late, great K Slay, there's two tracks, Rolling 50 Deep and Rolling 110 Deep. And you look at who he puts on that, and Melly Mel rhymes, I mean, everybody from Mobb Deep to Cool G Rap, Ice-T, everybody's on these records. They've been, you know, I think they get 8 bars. So Rolling 110 Deep is probably 40 minutes long. And I'm listening, you know, Cold Crush Kaz and Melly Mel can still fuck with it. Like, they can still sound as authentic as the current guys. They can switch it up. But when you go back and look at old boxing films or old NBA, you're like, oh, look at how slow these guys were. Look at this, or, you know, so there's recency bias as well. But how much did you change the game? How much did you completely influence? And Rakim completely, I think this was Melly Mel's point. He referenced Melly Mel and one other. Melly Mel referenced Rakim and one other, as far as when they came out, nobody rapped the same ever again after them. And he said, Eminem's great, but no, when Eminem came out, it didn't change the way I rhymed. So you got to also look at the evolution of it, so, you know, it's such a complex algorithm of what you factor in. Hits, financial success. I mean, Jay-Z's on the top of that list in part because he just became a billionaire, a record executive. He took rapping to another level that nobody had seen. But is he the most skillful rap? I mean, what is that? One of my favorite of his is 22 Twos.
Yeah.
He could rhyme his ass off. No doubt Jay-Z's one of the
He used to
most
rap
skilled.
fast.
He used to rap fast and, like short sleeve, I bare arms. Like he would make these metaphors just like Rakim. I hold the microphone like a grudge. Like it takes a lot of genius to make a metaphor that nobody has said before. I hold the microphone like a grudge, or like short sleeves, I bear arms. I mean, there's that genius to Jay-Z 100%. But yeah, I think the recency bias and the lack of clear definitions of, I mean, obviously I'm friendly with Ice-T. Ice-T to be number 45 on that list when they just, gave him a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I mean, I look at LL Cool J, Queen Latifah, and Ice-T in terms of longevity of their careers and can they still rap as well as being TV stars? So I'm not really sure.
I put Will in that category too.
Yeah, I mean, all those guys from the 88, 89, 91, 92 era, I mean, they had to be adaptable. And I think they were much more, a lot of people I meet now who are younger fans, they think 95, 96, 97, because of Biggie and Pac are the greatest eras. But you got tested, there were a lot more posse shows back in the day. I mean, imagine Ice-T went on one of the first major tours. Like there was the Bring the Noise tour, but the Def, I mean, it was Public Enemy, Eazy-E, Ice-T, and you all got 15 minutes on the stage. Imagine being at like the Detroit, Joe Louis Arena, wherever you were. It was like, there's Summer Jam and there's these big festivals now, but rap was still kind of seen as a fad for a lot of these guys in the early, the formative years, 88, 89. So these guys had to go out there and give their best 15 minutes. Yeah. I think the old school guys were better at entertaining a crowd. I mean, the mumble rap, that's one thing, but, but wasn't Kendrick Lamar, was he number 3 all time on the number 2? So there's recency bias there, right? I don't think the verdict is out on will Kendrick Lamar's records have the staying power of who's one of the older MCs that made the list, an LL Cool J or an Ice-T. So, and I would liken it to, Questlove did a great job curating this recent Grammy Awards with who did he pick? And it was an evolution. He started with, Melly Mel and Grandmaster Flash. He goes through it. He gets, West Coast rap comes in with Ice-T right after, Chuck D and Public Enemy. But then by the end there, I didn't even know it was Lil Baby. There were some recent rappers. And I was kind of looking at going, okay, these are current. This is relevancy. If you watch this in 10 years, will they seem to fit in this pantheon of people who really have, Hall of Fame status? I'm not sure.
But I think that remains to be seen. And I think, everybody takes that gamble. I mean, at the very least, even if they're not, they can, it'll be a snapshot as, this is what was popular in February 2023.
So it's a snapshot. I mean, we're looking at it like, I may have mentioned to you, the New York Times arts section yesterday. So that's Sunday, the 19th of February, had a very interesting full page or double page spread on a British magazine and how they've ranked the greatest films of all time. And, it used to always be Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane, and even into the 70s. And then, The Godfather Part 1 and 2 are not in there until quite a bit later. And
neither of those first 2 Godfather films are even in the top 10.
Oh yeah, they are, but not in 72, 73.
Oh, gotcha.
When they came out, by the 2000s, but perspectives shift and opinions shift over time and so there's a lot more foreign films. There was a few Japanese films I'd never even seen. I forget what was there was a couple. I mean, for years, the second best film of all time was ranked L'Avventura, The Adventure by Michelangelo Antonioni, which very few people have seen. It's a great black and white film. But so when you really are looking at these lists, it's so subjective and it's so based on how educated are you? Like if you say, what's your favorite novel of all time? Or but have you read all of the greats? Have you read Dickens? Like if you haven't, then you'll just say something recent. Oh, I like Michael Connelly, or I like so-and-so. So I would go back and look at the earliest greats in rap. So, I mean, for me, the greatest era, maybe because I discovered hip hop 86 with LL Cool J 85, 86 to 95, it started to get a little too violent after, the mid 90s, later stuff. But it's such a strange thing to make these. I mean, people like lists and categories and rankings now, right? Everybody wants to.
Well, I think you can express a lot with relatively little, and that's the digital age that we live in. I sat through, because I was very interested in people's opinions, and I'm of the belief, I mean, there are some things I agree with on the list, and there are some things I don't agree with on the list. But I wanted to read people's arguments or presentations, or what was, because again, there could be something that I very much disagree with, but if you make a strong case for it, I'll be like,
Sure.
I might not agree with it, but I really respect that. Like, your shit, what you're talking about. And so that part of it always intrigues me.
I just almost think, just appreciate the greats for the moment that they're in. And if this list was like the greatest rappers of the last 5 years, okay. But when you're really throwing a Kendrick Lamar in against a Melly Mel, it's apples and oranges. It's so different. He's operating in first of all, Kendrick Lamar does not exist without an Ice-T, an Ice Cube, a Snoop Dogg, a Too Short. Yeah, all the stuff that basically made it cool to rap about your, I mean, and here's the thing: if it's influence, Ice-T, I'm gonna just do this because I've written books with Ice-T. Ice-T, first guy to really curse on a record, like say bitch, and 6 a.m. blew. You might listen to that record and now say it's pretty simplistic, but 6 a.m, if you listen to these LA gangbangers like Big U from the Rolling 60, they're like, oh my God, we heard that record. Ice Cube will say, when we heard that record, Dr. Dre, 6 a.m. was a hugely influential, it was just a B-side. He rapped about the gangs of LA. He listed them, like, Midnight, which is a great song on the OG original Gangster album. He's like, he talks about Hoover, ETG, which is A-Tray Gangster. Guys weren't doing that. So there's skills, and then there's trailblazers. And I almost think, like, that expression, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Albert Einstein doesn't exist without Isaac Newton, and Isaac Newton doesn't exist without so if you're really gonna, who was the greatest physicist? Was it Einstein or Newton, or why are you comparing them? The whole world changed so fast. So I look at these lists and I look at it and say, it's very subjective. You got Queen Latifah on there. MC Lyte I'm looking at female rappers. MC Lyte was a really important female rapper. I mean, there were trailblazers. Latifah definitely should be on there as a female MC. But
no disrespect to Nicki, but I don't think she should be above Missy.
Was she?
Yeah, Nicki
was she above
number 10.
Okay. So that makes the list invalid to me, because if she's above Queen Latifah, ladies first, and UNITY, who you calling a bitch? Then somebody did a calculus there and said, okay, we've got to figure out. Okay, so I mean, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. There's an editor going, okay, can we get some more recent guys in here? And they start balancing. Can we get some women in here? It's not woke culture. It's just, let's try to be a little bit more balanced because if everybody just voted for guys from like the mid 90s, but people would look at this and say, okay, I mean, younger people who are 18 or 19. Now, I have to say, when I heard Monster on one of Kanye is kind of dead to me because of what he's been saying.
Well,
But
oh,
I
yeah,
mean, I could.
that is, I don't hesitate to use this word in this from Nikki. That is a legendary verse.
That it really is, and
that verse will go down in hip hop history.
she had no record deal as far as I knew at that time, and she came on that record and just bodied everybody. I'm a motherfucking like, and that was the point where I realized this chick can rhyme. But I'm looking back, there's all these different eras, right? And that native tongues. So you got Tribe. Was Q-Tip on the list?
He was.
Okay. If Q-Tip's not on the list, if Q-Tip's on the list, give them a bit of a pass. But there were so many rappers I looked at and I said, really, you're gonna say that Nicki Minaj is a more influential and a better rapper than Latifah or MC Lyte? It's all, so that's just recency bias. Like that's what people are hearing. She is a very skillful MC. Now the problem with these lists as well, when Rolling Stone, for example, does greatest rock songs of all time, it'll end up being something like, which I think it was, like a Rolling Stone, Bob Dylan. Great record, absolutely great record. But what is the formula that people are?
And that's the thing. I think everybody has their own approach to it. Like, actually, while we took that little break, I got the 500 album thing because they've revised this list. Rolling Stone has a couple times over the years. I have a couple different books with this same list in it, and it's
so where are they at with this, with rock or with hip hop?
This is just in general. 500 greatest albums of all time. And so again, this just speaks to the younger ages of journalism. And again, I don't say this disrespectfully, but to be fair to some of the newer artists and newer whatever, like I'm not as well versed in it to speak on it. That being said, I think one thing that proves its power is its longevity. So for example, and again, no disrespect to Beyonce, she's an icon of our current era. And so on and so forth. She will go down in history. But the idea at this point in 2023 for it, to officially be declared that her Lemonade album, which was released in 2016, is better than Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, it doesn't quite, not to say that 30 years from now it couldn't be better than it, but it's too soon to tell.
Like, let's take hip hop out of the equation and just talk about pop. I mean, I watched the Grammys, and there's no doubt Taylor Swift makes some great pop records. Harry Styles makes some great Watermelon Sugar. These are great pop records. Now, what was the pop of 1965, 1966, 1967? Is Taylor Swift, Sam Smith, these guys, are they going to stand up to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones? And I'm not talking about their albums. I just mean their hit records. Is anybody going to be listening to Watermelon Sugar the way they listen to Let It Be? Or like, I mean, the Beatles changed rock and roll to the point that serious critics were saying they are writing like classical music. They're writing like Schubert. So, I mean, I look at pop and I go, you cannot possibly convince me that the pop music, as much as it's catchy and great, like I was listening to Taylor Swift, my phone wasn't hooking up to my, the Bluetooth, and Taylor Swift has a song Anti-Hero, and I'm listening going, she's a good writer. She could write, but can she write like John Lennon, Paul McCartney, or Keith Richards and Mick Jagger? Or, it was the Wild West when I moved to New York, 88, 89, 90, there were guys, I mean, I was in recording studios. Guys would just say, I'm doing this. And then they would figure there's going to be a way to, especially like in the sample heavy era, nobody sampled more than, these guys like DJ Premier and Pete Rock. I mean, there were collages of samples, right? Then Dre came along, and with Scott Storch, who was a very important guy for Dre, like in terms of playing original music, like up until
he's
Dre,
a beast on the keyboards.
Yeah, and I was in there, and I went to Miami, and he just started to play Billy Joel freestyle, and like he showed me how he made up, Forgot About Dre and Still DRE, and it was just, he's a classically trained pianist, and that added something new. if you remember, well, I mean, this is the thing I do remember. Hip hop just became, and it was kind of a knock against hip hop for a lot of the, snobs, was like, they're sampling, like just taking other people's music, and it wasn't original, music. Well, it was recreating it. And I advise anybody to watch, I've only seen the first episode, Chuck D's I think it's called Fight the Power, or How Hip Hop Changed
the world. Yeah.
Yeah. And they talk about how they show the social conditions that led to cutbacks in school programs and lack of in the Bronx, but everywhere, Detroit, where you're at, everywhere, times got harder and harder for the poor people under Reaganomics. But out of that, resourceful kids realized, well, we don't have a trumpet, we don't have lessons, let's turn the turntable into an instrument. And that's one of the geniuses of hip hop.
And to Dre's credit too, I think one of the things that he did that made him as successful as he was, sonically speaking, is he put melody in hip hop.
Yep.
There really wasn't anybody that did that quite like that prior to him.
It's true. I mean, I've got some favorite songs. Like there's a song, Scarface's Diary of a Madman. Just nobody listens to it much, but like some gangster guys in New York introduced me to the song Going Down. And he basically remakes 99 Luftballons by Nina. And it's like, it's going down tonight. And the whole sample, or I think they just remade the record, is, 99. But he turns it into this like player kind of, I'm about to pick up this chick and I hope she's not one of my homie's baby's mamas. Let me make sure. It's like, it was kind of the Wild West in that era where guys were just taking melodies and from well-known songs.
Yeah, and to see, for me, it's back to the Billboard list of the rap. Like to me, Scarface, is like top 3, top 5. Easily.
Where did he end up on?
He was, I believe, let's see, wait, Nicki's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
I mean, in a way, I'm looking at what Questlove did more than what these lists.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Did. He basically said, how do I do a history of hip hop in 17 or 18 minutes?
Yeah.
And Chuck D came out.
And I would consider Questlove more of an authority on hip hop.
Absolutely. So I would go back and look at I would tell anybody, go look at, who did DJ K Slay put on Rolling 50 Deep, Rolling 110 Deep? Yep. Who was his opinions? Who are Questlove's opinion of what's important to get across to a mainstream audience? And, by the way, I think they all had maybe 8 bars. So Ice-T came out and did a bit of Nino's theme, New Jack Hustling. Yeah. And then Busta came out, and Busta got a much longer run because he did the tongue twisting shit. And I thought, I bet everybody's a little bit like, why did he get 45 seconds and I got 15 seconds, But I mean, if somebody were to say to me, what's a great encapsulation of the last, 50 years? It's 50 years of hip hop. I would look at that Grammy performance before this list. It's an insider making the list, right? Questlove is an insider. He knows the genre. He's understanding it. He's making tough decisions because it can't be an hour long. So he's saying to himself, what fits this? Where did Eminem end up on the greatest MCs list?
5. 4 people ranked higher than him were
5.
Pac,
Wow, okay.
Nas, Kendrick, and Jay.
I mean, so again, who can rap who can condense and compress so much complex information into such a lyrical manner? I mean, his skill level on that is beyond anything I've heard anybody else do.
Yeah.
But I remember like a drug dealer guy that I knew in New York, I was blasting one of my favorite songs by Eminem, Rock Bottom, because he was just talking about, it was so raw and real.
Oh,
right?
I love that song.
Yeah. And this kid came in to my apartment. He was Puerto Rican, and I said, "Man," he goes, "I just can't get past his nasal voice." So that's the other thing. Like when you rank the greatest MCs,
Mm.
Rakim's voice is just beautiful. Ice Cube's voice is beautiful. I mean, there's certain, a sound to your voice. And that's important too, because when we listen to like the Billie Holidays, the Elephants, like so I can't say Eminem has one of the greatest vocal sounds, but his writing ability, and I'm not talking off the top of his head, but what he's able to compress. And I think he also changed the game for a lot of people in terms of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of hip hop before Eminem was posturing how much money you've got, and it was fake. I mean, I'm not sure. Let me think about.
I think Pac brought strength and vulnerability to the game prior to.
Yeah, true. But what Eminem took was, Pac brought vulnerability, but he never really said, "I'm a loser." Like Eminem basically came out. I don't
He was
know.
very self-deprecating, wasn't he?
Yeah, around the same time when Beck had that song, I'm a loser. Eminem is coming out there going, my mother gave me drugs and I got beat up by this kid, D'Angelo Bailey, and I got brain damage, and I was a loser. Like it's just he changed the subject matter of hip hop, which is an important thing too, because the braggadocious, a lot of people were really turned off. I'm dating myself, but whatever. In the early days of hip hop, it was like, man, I just can't get past the egotism of these guys. They're just bragging. And I was like, but they come from nothing. They're bragging because they really don't. It's like Ali saying, "I'm the greatest, I'm blah, 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 blah." He actually was afraid of Sonny Liston. He admitted it later. He was like, man, I was, Sonny Liston was a scary motherfucker, but I had to. So a lot of early hip hop was bragging, but it was guys who were broke and guys who were coming from the projects. What Eminem did, I thought, was like really, instead of like MC Search, the Beastie Boys were kind of authentic to who they were, because they never pretended to be like hardcore. They were like a punk band that were like, but MC Search was a really good example of like when hip hop, there were a lot of white guys. There were a few other guys besides MC Search who were just like down with black culture. And, MC Search used to wear the Negro Leagues baseball caps. I mean, it's great. It's great that you're that into it. But then Eminem kind of flipped it and just said, nah, I'm white trash, family from Mississippi, broken home. I got nothing, I was working at Gilbert's Lodge flipping burgers, and like he just didn't have any pretense, and that honesty. But does that make him the 5th greatest MC of all time? I'm not sure.
This is totally open to interpretation, discussion, debate, but my opinion, and I would say this about music in general, more so than artists, I think what would be a more compelling list, or dare I say a more accurate list, but I think still, but it kind of reins in all of these multiple factors that we're talking about here, is what are the 50 greatest hip hop albums?
Yep. That's better than
I think that would be a better list or more intriguing list to me than the 50 greatest MCs or the 50 greatest.
Because you know what? A great MC can have a shitty album. One thing I've noticed with your generation and younger, so my daughter's 20, is, I noticed this years ago. Oh, kids say so-and-so's underrated, so-and-so's overrated. But everything now, even like if you go to your dentist, do you mind giving me a Google rating?
Yep.
Like really, it matters? Because so everybody is rating everything now. And as an author, you try not to check your Goodreads and your Amazon, be like, oh shit, my rating came down, point. Somebody rated it 2 instead of 5. The internet has empowered everybody to be a critic. And to rate everything and to make lists of things, and maybe their frame of references are not the same as more worldly people. But I mean, like in a way it's great. And I mean, to see a list where you've got Jay-Z, who's 50 some years old, and Kendrick Lamar, and I mean, to see a list that's trying to be diverse
Yeah.
in terms of time periods and styles and all that. It's a devil's bargain. Or
To me, I think there are 3 types of lists that people get intertwined all together and they just call them different things. And I think there's the best, I think there's the most influential, and I think there's your favorite.
yeah, okay. So the best I discount because that's all subjective.
Yes.
The influential, you can actually go back and say,
Yeah.
wow, blah, blah, blah,
To
blah,
me,
blah. And then, yeah.
if you're making a list of the most influential hip hop acts, Run DMC is number 1, hands down. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ice-T, I mean, here's a great story, right? In that book I just finished with Ice-T and Spike, Ice-T was talking about, rap was just kind of like a joke. He was doing it for fun.
Mhm.
And thinking of maybe getting out of being an armed robber, or sorry, not an armed robber, just a smash and grab robber,
Yeah.
and a hustler. And then he said, well, but Run DMC, I think it must have been 84 or 85, came to LA. And he said, holy shit, they sold out the stadium, the arena, and they got lasers. This is like, because the early guys, come on, man, they weren't making any money.
Yeah.
Grandmaster Caz and Melly Mel, and they were working for nightclub promoters who were ripping them off. And I think a lot of those early guys were making like a few $100 just to, get on the mic. And then, so I said, when he saw Run DMC, he said, this is going to be big as rock and roll. And I would actually argue that it supplanted rock and roll. It became,
I think rap won the culture war against rock and roll for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, but yeah, so the idea that I have my favorites, you have your favorites, and then we can talk about the most influential. When we say the best, it's just like saying,
yeah, I like that. No, that's almost a good dissection. Yeah, or perspective. Yeah, just cut that third list out of there.
Well, it'd be like if somebody saying Italian cuisine is much better than French cuisine. Okay.
I remember I interviewed. Well,
in some ways, yes.
He's my old boss, but Chuck Kriegmer over at All Hip Hop. He, All Hip Hop basically started that top 5 dead or alive list that, people, in that phrase that people, have used and continue to use. And so one of the times they had, he wrote a list, and he said, and he essentially said the same thing, but he said, my top 5 are the top 5 MCs that have affected me most.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like, that's dope.
Yeah. So I think you've put it on the head. Let's talk about lists in terms of 3 things.
Or 3
greatest of all time, whatever lists,
or
which
best,
to me,
best doesn't exist. It's most influential and like your personal favorites,
right?
And
so
somewhere between those 2 lists, the best exist.
And so when I listen to people saying, LeBron has suppressed, is the GOAT versus Jordan, I said different
exactly
styles,
like
different.
In one hand, statistically, yes, LeBron did score more points in his, career, NBA career, than Jordan did. He made history a couple weeks ago when he did that, and that's awesome. Good for him. I don't take anything away from that accomplishment.
Yeah.
But it's like, to me, regardless of statistics, be given when I grew up, which is again a little bit after you, but still in the Jordan era, i.e. his greatness, like Jordan will always be the best to me, even if his records get broken.
And so for me, I'm a Bears fan. Greatest running back I ever saw was Walter Payton. Payton, and Emmitt Smith surpassed him, and I was like, yeah, but he's not Walter Payton. Now older people will say, but you never saw Jim Brown. Jim Brown was feared, like he was playing in a different era, and he would run over people. But then I laugh, and I we just saw the Super Bowl. I'm like, you're in Michigan. Barry Sanders week in, week out, we would watch Barry Sanders, and he's not even talked about that much anymore, and just say, how the fuck did he do that? Like, he was. So I don't even like these comparisons between eras or between styles, because Walter Payton was consistent. Barry Sanders might have been the most gifted running back, and he was about 5'7" and just whatever. But yeah, we're talking apples and oranges when we're talking about eras. Another thing that I think needs to be taken into account in these lists and these is that, originally it was all New York, and even Ice-T and early, early rappers in the West Coast were trying to sound like they were from New York. And then something changed in the 90s where, you know, you had Scarface, you had the Ghetto Boys sounding like they're from Houston. You had Juvenile and Master P and all these guys, Cash Money, all this stuff sounding like it's from New Orleans. And yeah, and Nelly came out and it was like country grammar, you know, he's from
St. Louis.
St. Louis. I was going to say Kansas City, St. Louis, Missouri. And it opened up a different sound. So if you're from Missouri and you hear Nelly, you're going to relate to that sound of what he's saying a lot more than you are to some guy from the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
The Big Pun, you know, Big Pun. Did Big Pun make the list, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
He was in the 20s.
Okay. Well, as in terms of speed of delivery and, you know, but yeah, DMX, I'm thinking about all these people that changed the game in terms of, you know, at least in New York, the Locks, you know, Jada Kiss and Styles P. And I remember when DMX came out, people were just like, man, his energy level. I mean, it was crack or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like where my dog's at. Like it was just
Get At Me Dog is crazy.
yeah. I mean,
that's one of the best hardcore rap records ever made.
Or, you know, y'all gonna make me lose my mind. Like you just so it would be very tough for me to go through and say the 50 records that were the most game changing from me being a kind of journalist, hanging out with, you know, hip hop guys in New York, when we heard them and when it came in and you were like, whoa. Like I remember when Pac, we were in a recording studio, this guy I knew, and somebody had on a DAT, one of the like early digital, he had an advanced copy of Hit 'Em Up, and we listened to that and he was going at Biggie, and this guy that I knew, this gangster rapper, he was like, motherfuckers are gonna start dying behind this shit. Like, and I didn't really relate to it yet. Like I thought, okay, they're talking crazy to each other, but the streets already knew this was not gonna end in verbal, you know, it was gonna get ugly and violent. And I can't say it's all Tupac's part, you know, fault, but whatever. But you know, there are moments for me when I heard certain records and I said, I mean, nobody listens to Foo Schnickens anymore, right? Like it's kind of but the tongue twister, the super fast rapping.
Das Effects, yeah.
Das Effects was even bigger than, Das Effects came out. They went Effects, it was like, whoa. So there was constant innovation. And now we're at a point where it's 50 years old and you're looking back on it and you're saying, what's the greatest? Well, it's what was the greatest for you when you liked it? You know, I much prefer what you said, which is most influential and my favorite.
Yeah.
Another thing, getting back to these lists, like Questlove would know how to do this. A DJ, a Funkmaster Flex, who's still around, or anybody who's really big.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you still play something from the Chronic? Can you still play whatever, a 30-year-old record? You know, you can definitely play Candy Shop and stuff like that to this day, or certain Biggie records. No, if you put on The Message by Grandmaster, it's not going to go over in the club. People are not going to really get it. It was a huge record at the time, but there are certain sounds that are going to last. Just like if I hear the Beatles, you know, or I see, I'm one of those guys that if I'm watching The Godfather, if it just happens to be on TV, I just can't stop watching it.
Yeah.
I've seen it 10,000 times, but I need to see it. Or the original Rocky. Like, I'm just like, I got to see what happens next. It's so good. Yeah. It's so well done. It's good. It's good that we reflect on these things. And I'm glad we had the opportunity. I just want to, you know, shout out before we end, like, you know, so impact on the culture, you know, Ice-T was on all over Instagram. I think, you know, I shouted him out a bit, like.
And RIP, speaking of that, RIP Richard Belzer.
Yeah, his partner from Law and Order. And, you know, Ice posted this thing where he was like, man, he turned 64, 65. He had a birthday and he got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And then, like, he goes, I'm at one of the greatest weeks of my life. And then one of my best friends just died.
I saw that,
very young, yeah. So he goes, you'll always remember to enjoy those moments. But yeah, like, I loved it. If anybody hasn't seen it, just go fucking on Ice-T's Instagram, where he's like, and shout out to the fucking haters, all the people that wanted it. Like you know, Time Warner was getting bomb threats when he did Cop Killer, And he's like, all the people that wanted to end my career. Well, now I'm on the Walk of Fame, motherfucker. So you can't take this away from me.
Yeah,
But
everybody's entitled to their opinion, but to me, my thing is just to be educated about it. You know, it's
100%.
like, I think Rakim is dope, and you know, again, I think objectively, influentially, best lyricists changed the game more than anybody in some respects. But to me, Nas is my dude because he speaks more to people of my generation.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
Illmatic is more my generation than Paid in Full. And that's not to take anything away from Paid in Full, but that's just how the times change and why, and just how.
And also, you know, you got to also go back and say, Live from the Barbecue, when people heard Nas, Nasty Nas back then, it just, again, you got to go through it historically. When we heard that record, it was Main Source, you know, and it was, you know, searched, but it was like, who the fuck is rapping this way? And that is something you can't say about. I don't think I heard Drake and said, who the fuck is rapping this? I mean, I knew him from Degrassi. So, you know, greatest of all time for me are those guys that when you heard them in their time period, everybody just stopped and said, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
And Snoop is in there because when Snoop came out, it was this late. There's a whole ton of guys that are massively influential that maybe aren't the greatest ever, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I would actually probably listen to Nas more than I would listen to Rakim, just because I think a lot of his records stand up better.
Yeah.
But
again,
anyway, man,
there is no Nas without Rakim.
Yep, they're all building on each other.
Yeah.
What time is it?
Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.